Senator Schumer, your reaction to this?
It is outrageous. It's a page right out of Xi's playbook. This is just despicable, disgusting, and against democratic values. Trump and his allies seem to want to shut down speech that they don't like to hear. That is not what democracies do. That is what autocracies do. And it doesn't matter whether you agree with Kimmel or not. He has the right to free speech. And so it is just outrageous. It is indicative of autocracy. And I am just outraged by it. Again, this is what dictators do. This is what Xi would do. This is what Putin would do. We are not that country.
Before the actual facts get away from us, let's take a moment to recap what happened with Jimmy Kimmel over the course of the last 48 hours. On Monday night, in a clip I'm not going to replay because everybody's seen it 100 times already, and I might scream if I have to see it again, Kimmel opens his nightly Democrat Party propaganda show by making a series of demonstrably false statements. He asserts that the MAGA gang, which is a very respectful way of referring to half the people in the country, I think, is engaged in a cover-up of the fact that Charlie Kirk's assassin, the guy with the furry trans lover who wrote Antifa slogans all over his shell casings, is, quote, one of them. Because, you know, I'm sure we all have conservative Republican friends and family members who are shacked up with furries and enjoy singing Italian communist anthems from the 1920s. He then goes on to say, with that smug, self-satisfied smirk on his stubble-bearded face that we all love so much, that they, the MAGA gang, as he calls us, because apparently we are the moral equivalent of the Crips and the Bloods and the Latin Kings, are desperately trying to use Charlie's murder to, as he puts it, score political points. And this is one of those cases where bizarro world leftist scumbags make the mistake of assuming everybody else views the world the same way they do. For Kimmel simply dismisses out of hand any possibility that we are actually angry and upset about a young husband and father being murdered in broad daylight, while trying to have a respectful dialogue with some college students. Oh no, it can't be that. We just want to own the libs, you see. We only want to use this event to help the elephant party dunk on the donkey party in the midterms. He then takes a couple of cheap shots at Donald Trump because, of course he does. And his studio audience of morally bankrupt lemmings giggles along right on cue each time the producer illuminates the laugh now sign. And let's just pick this up on the other side. It's Thursday, the 18th of September. This is Curmudgeon's Corner. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we cordially welcome Mr. Kimmel to his new career as a third-rate YouTuber. Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to Curmudgeon's Corner. Let's finish laying out the facts before we get into the deeper analysis. Clearly, when Jimmy Kimmel went out to give his opening monologue on Monday night, he thought he was still living in the world that he lived in last Monday, where he can say any vile, slanderous, reprehensible thing he wants to say, and as long as the targets are Trump and Republicans and conservatives, his status as a protected media mouthpiece and dutiful lapdog of the Hollywood establishment and the Democrat Party will insulate him from any possible consequences. The studio audience will giggle right along on cue. His bosses at the Disney ABC grooming syndicate won't notice or care how dismal his ratings are or how much money he is losing for the network. The same people who cover for him will always cover for him, and he can jump in his limo after the show and be driven back to his palatial Malibu mansion and drift off to sleep with that smug, self-satisfied smirk still on his face, and then do it all over again tomorrow and keep collecting his $1.2 million paycheck every 2 weeks in perpetuity, or until he decides to retire, at which time his bosses and a grateful nation will give him a loving week-long farewell party befitting his well-earned status as the Johnny Carson of the 21st century. But cocoons of protection can be fickle things, and when you've grown too accustomed to living inside of one, you can sometimes be the last one to realize that's no longer your place of residence. And here was Jimmy Kimmel's fatal mistake that just cost him his career. He was so used to being protected, so accustomed to being able to say any evil, awful, dishonest thing he wants to say with total impunity that he didn't bother licking his thumb and sticking it up in the air. Because if he had done that, he would have realized the winds have shifted, and they have shifted rather drastically, and he is no longer living in the world of last Monday, and he's not as untouchable as he thinks he is. And a lot of this goes back to the corporate culture that pervades the Disney ABC grooming syndicate from top to bottom. On the ABC television network, and I'm not just talking about ABC News here, though they certainly are the worst of it, pretty much all of their programming, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is in-kind propaganda for the Democrat Party, and this is against the law. You cannot use the publicly owned broadcast airwaves for partisan political activism. The fact that all three major broadcast networks do that exact thing and have been doing it for decades doesn't make it any less illegal. One of the main reasons we have an organ of government called the Federal Communications Commission is to prevent that from being done. But the Steve Colbert Show or the Jimmy Kimmel Show, just to name the two most egregious examples in the sphere of what we used to call late-night comedy shows, they have been Democrat Party propaganda platforms and very little else since the day Donald Trump descended the golden escalator and announced his candidacy for president in June of 2015, a little over a decade ago. If an elected Democrat needs to do some damage control, if a Democrat candidate needs help winning an election, if a former Democrat office holder needs to pimp their new book, where is the first place they run to when they finish their live shots on MSNBC and CNN? Well, they run to Steve Colbert's big comfy couch on Monday and Jimmy Kimmel's big comfy couch on Tuesday, or vice versa. And they get whatever they need when they go there, whether it's some easy softball questions or a sympathetic shoulder on which to cry, whatever the case may be. But they know that when they go there, nothing will ever be said by the host that could cause damage to their personal brand or the interests of the Democrat Party. And it's not just the guest interviews, not by a long shot. Can you show me any Steve Colbert or Jimmy Kimmel opening monologue in the last 10 years or more that wasn't 100% on point with that day's Democrat Party talking points? Of course you can't, because no such monologue exists. And again, all of this is against the law. Laws don't become less valid or less enforceable just because Democrats have grown accustomed to ignoring them. It works just the same for broadcast television as it does for illegal immigration, shocking though that may be to some people. And for people who love to portray themselves as the exclusive guardians of something called our democracy, these television personalities seem to have a uniquely dim to non-existent understanding of how democratic self-government actually works. And now that the FCC is being run by a man like Brendan Carr, a man who does have an interest in seeing that our laws are enforced instead of being casually flouted, well, there's getting a very quick and unwanting education in all of that. Because you know what happened this week? A lot of decent Americans saw excerpts from that vile, subhuman, dastardly monologue that Jimmy Kimmel delivered on Monday night, and they said, you know what? I am mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I know this is against the law, and I am no longer going to tolerate these smug, smarmy bastards being allowed to get away with this shit. So they lit up the FCC's phone lines, they lit up the FCC's email, and they said, if these awful men are being allowed to flout our laws with apparent total impunity, what the hell is the point of having an FCC? And Brendan Carr, the FCC commissioner, he said, you know what? The people are exactly right. And we are supposed to be working for the people, after all, and the people are demanding, in large numbers, quite vociferously, that the laws enacted by their representatives actually be enforced. So Brendan Carr issues a statement around midday yesterday, and he says to the Disney ABC grooming syndicate, you have been flouting this nation's laws far too brazenly for far too long, and your employee, Mr. James Kimmel, has just crossed a line that the American people are unwilling to tolerate being crossed. Consequently, you are being put on notice. You can address this matter internally, or you can ignore us and keep thumbing your noses at the American people and their duly enacted laws, in which case further action will be required on our part. It was a thinly veiled threat, but it was veiled very effectively, that amounted to the FCC saying, we will revoke your broadcast license if we don't see prompt and decisive action from your side. But my favorite part of this object lesson in democracy is that the executives at the Disney ABC grooming syndicate had the choice taken out of their hands. If it were up to them, knowing what we know about the corporate culture that exists inside that particular den of moral and intellectual filth, they probably would have told the FCC to fuck right off and threatened to file a whole shitload of lawsuits. But it was ABC's two biggest affiliate groups, Nexstar and Sinclair, who first took action. They both announced, within a couple hours of each other, that we cannot, in good conscience, continue airing the Jimmy Kimmel Show on our local affiliates. So we are preempting his program indefinitely, starting right now. And again, this is what democracy in action looks like. Because normal people weren't just lighting up the switchboard at the FCC, they were also lighting up the switchboards of their local ABC affiliates. And they were saying, I am no longer okay with this degenerate clown having a show on my local station. And that filtered up to the station managers. And then it filtered up to the conglomerates that own the affiliates. And they had no choice but to say, look, Disney ABC can do whatever it wants, but we can't put this show on the air anymore because our viewers and our affiliates simply will not tolerate it. They have had enough. They are done. What does democratic self-government in a free market society look like? It looks just like that. And as you might expect, since they are, after all, the worst people in the world, elected Democrats are far more outraged by Jimmy Kimmel being deplatformed than they were about Charlie Kirk being shot to death, because, of course they were. We know for an absolute fact that many of them have been probably privately celebrating the murder, because they only care about power. And Charlie was such an effective communicator for the other side that he was a clear and present danger to the maintenance of the power that they care so much about. It's far more offensive to them that they will no longer have the use of one of their most reliable lapdog handmaiden propaganda platforms. But in closing, I want to say I have found it distasteful and rather upsetting that so many people on the right are reacting to this news like they just won the Super Bowl, with all of the attendant whooping and hollering and cheering and laughing that accompanies such things. Because this was not a fair exchange. Jimmy Kimmel getting his well-deserved comeuppance is not worth the price of Erica Kirk being a widow and her kids having to grow up with a gravesite instead of a father. Jimmy Kimmel still gets to be alive. Charlie Kirk does not. Jimmy Kimmel, however dismal his future looks now, is 26 years older than Charlie Kirk will ever be. So maybe let's tamp down the celebrations just a little bit or save them for a later date, is all I'm saying. I'm done. That's all I've got. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Get off my lawn.